All right, the topic that we're covering today is going to be on evolutionary biology. This next topic of discussion is basically evolution, biodiversity, and conservation bio. And we kind of broke it down into several PowerPoints like usual. So this first one is on evolutionary biology. We have the term up here, population. The reason why I put this term first is because evolution happens at the population level, that it does not occur in an individual. It has to be in a population. So remember, a population was a group of living organisms living together in a particular area and that were interacting. Now, the next term up here is evolution. When we look at this word evolution, it means change over time. Change over time. So what is biological evolution? It's a genetic change in populations over time. Genetic change in populations over time. So these genetic changes lead to changes in appearance, functioning, or behavior over generations. So lead to changes in appearance, functioning, or behavior. Over generations, let's say. Over generations. Now, there's two main ways for for evolution to occur. It could be something that's random through mutation, or it could be through a process called natural selection. So first, random is through mutation. A genetic change in the DNA occurs. So I could remember how we talked about what a DNA molecule is, and we mentioned how there's adenine, guanine, cytosine, and thymine, these different bases. I could, through a random process, accidentally switch out an adenine for a guanine, or I can add an extra cytosine, or I could delete one of them. So that's just a random change in the DNA. The second one is via natural selection. Natural selection is the process in which individuals that have certain traits are more likely to survive and reproduce. Oops, that just went blank. And reproduce under a particular set of environmental conditions than those without the traits. So let's write that out. Natural selection is a process in which individuals with certain traits are more likely to survive and reproduce under a particular set of, we're going to have to continue up here, particular set of environmental conditions. Than those without the traits. So what this is saying, let me give you an example. Let's say that there are 50 people in a room, and some of us are just naturally faster than others. Some are naturally born fast runners, and some are a little slower than others. Now, we then put in a bunch of hungry lions into the room, right? And we're in a larger room or a larger field or a larger space, let's say. Who's going to be caught first or captured first? It's going to be the ones that are the slowest runners. The ones that are the fastest are going to obviously survive. So these individuals in a population already have the traits. That's what it's important to understand about natural selection. The individuals already have the traits. They're already naturally fast runners. So what happens? They survive. So they're going to mate, and they're going to keep passing on these traits. The individuals in that population that are slower runners are going to be captured and killed. So if they're killed and they're dead, they're obviously not going to be reproducing. So therefore, they're not going to pass their traits on. And that's what natural selection is. It's a process in which individuals that already have these traits to certain kind of conditions survive and reproduce, so they pass on more of their traits. Whereas other individuals that do not have those traits are going to not be able to reproduce and survive and pass on their traits or genes. So here's a simple example of natural selection. Here what we're seeing on the left-hand side, we're seeing a group of bacteria. This group of bacteria contains, in red, the normal bacteria. The ones in blue have something in their DNA that just makes it resistant to antibiotics. So then in the picture B, in the second picture, we see here they're exposed to antibiotics. Most of them die. Maybe one survives for some random reason. We don't know why. But the two blue ones that are resistant are going to survive. So then we see the next picture here. We see that more of those blue ones start multiplying, making more of themselves. And then eventually the resistant strain replaces almost all of the bacteria that we see, or most of the population, and the ones that were not resistant are going to basically disappear from that population. Okay. So evolution by natural selection. It is one of the best supported topics in science and concepts. It is the foundation of biology. So many aspects are based on natural selection. It's really a foundation for understanding environmental science, because a huge aspect of environmental science is ecology. And ecology is so strongly tied to evolution. Evolutionary processes influence agriculture, pesticide resistance, our health, medicine. And who proposed this? Two people. In 1858, both Charles Darwin, which we've probably all heard, who got mainly all the credit. The other person was Alfred Russel Wallace. Alfred Russel Wallace also did the same thing as Darwin, and he also proposed natural selection as the mechanism for evolution. So they both worked on this independently and proposed the same concept. So here's a picture on the left of Darwin, and on the right you see Alfred Russel Wallace. Okay. So it says species adapt to the environment. When we hear this word adapt, we think that, oh, an individual just grows longer arms so they could climb trees, or they just change and do things. But it's things that they already have. So it says a parent that produces more offspring passes on more genes to future generations. That makes sense. Over time, certain characteristics that lead to better reproductive success become more prevalent. So they become more common. So an adaptive trait or an adaptation is a trait that is already possessed in an individual or a population that promotes reproductive success. So this is a trait that promotes reproductive success. All right, next thing, sexual reproduction. that also leads to genetic variation. Now, in a different way, when we talk about sexual reproduction, we're making new combinations of genes. So this is also kind of a form of evolution that we don't really think of. But sexual reproduction also produces new combinations. Also produces new combinations. All right, so environmental conditions determine the pressures of natural selections. Organisms need to have time, or organisms need time to adapt to these changing conditions. Here, what we're seeing is a little bit about natural selection, how it essentially weeds out the unfit individuals, right? The survival of the fittest we've always heard as being a term associated with natural selection. It also helps elaborate and diversify different traits, which leads to the formation of new species. Here's some evidence on natural selection. It is evident in every adaptation of every organism, so we see it all over. Artificial selection is kind of a way that we artificially do natural selection, essentially. Artificial selection is the process of selection, conducted under human direction. All right, and what we're seeing in this picture is we see a wolf as far as the common ancestor for all dogs, and through selection, we came up with all these different breeds. And same thing, Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, broccoli, cabbage, all came from the same ancestor. Geological processes affect natural selection as well. Tectonic plates shift slowly on the planet's mantle, changing the Earth's surface. Real quick, just to give you a quick reminder, you've probably at some point in your educational career or history have talked about the different layers of the Earth, or you've seen Magic School Bus and you remember those different layers. The outermost layer of the Earth is called the crust, right? Then we go in and the crust is solid, made up of rocks and sediment. We go into the second layer and you have the mantle. Then you go, and that's where you have a lot of the molten lava or magma. And then you get into the outer core, and then you have the inner core as well. So here, when we say the mantle, those tectonic plates or those pieces of the crust are shifting on the mantle. So the location of different continents are going to affect climate and thus species distribution. So the movement of these plates have allowed the spread and evolution of different species. And we have things like earthquakes can change the Earth's surface, volcanic eruptions can destroy habitats or reduce or isolate or wipe out populations of species. Here in this image, we're seeing 225 million years ago that everything was kind of all together. All these continents were in the same location. But then they started shifting away from each other and migrating. And what you had happen was, in the present day, we have this separation. So where North America once was a little warmer than where it is today. Or when we're looking at Africa, the tip of Africa was much cooler because it was closer to Antarctica. Now it's a little different. So climate change obviously affects natural selection. We have these cooling and warming periods that have covered much of the Earth with glacial ice, have melted the ice, and changed the sea levels. So long-term climate change determines where different types of plants and animals can survive, and it's caused the extinction also of a lot of different species. So here we see the glacial ice coverage during the past 18,000 years. On the left you can see how there's much more glacial ice. And on the right-hand side, you can see the difference here. Okay. We're finished with that topic. What we're going to talk about next is going to continue on this evolution.